Put the bag down. Hands where I can see them. The mall went still. Conversations died. A woman clutched her child. A phone recorded. Logan Reese stood firm, gun raised, his authority absolute. Victoria Carter didn't flinch. No fear, no uncertainty. Just a steady, piercing gaze that cut through the silence. The weight of the moment hung thick. Then, her voice, calm, unwavering, and final. You just made the kind of mistake people don't recover from. Reese's grip tightened. The crowd murmured. Cameras rolled. How did it come to this? Stick around to see how this unfolds. And if you don't want to miss more stories like this, hit subscribe. The steady hum of voices blended with the soft jazz, playing through the speakers of Westfield Mall. Shoppers moved in and out of luxury boutiques, their arms draped with designer bags. The scent of expensive cologne lingered in the air, mixing with the faint aroma of fresh coffee from a nearby cafe. Victoria Carter walked through the mall with measured ease, her hands tucked into the pockets of her hoodie. She wasn't in a rush, wasn't drawing attention, just another customer enjoying a day off. Her navy joggers and athletic sneakers were practical, comfortable. Nothing about her appearance suggested wealth or status. But despite the casual attire, there was something unmistakable about her presence. A quiet authority. A composure that only came from years of command. Logan Reese stood at the upper level, arms crossed over his vest. His patrol shift had been uneventful, until now. His gaze locked onto Carter as she entered a high-end sporting goods store. Something didn't sit right. A black woman, alone, dressed like that? His mind jumped to conclusions. Maybe she was casing the place. Maybe she was looking for an easy grab. His jaw clenched. He followed her inside, keeping his distance, watching closely as she browsed. She reached the register. Reese's hand drifted toward his holster. This was it. Time to make a move. Victoria Carter stepped out of the store, adjusting the bag in her hand. The air inside had been cool, the scent of polished leather and new merchandise lingering in her senses. But the second she stepped into the open mall corridor, a voice sliced through the air. "Stop right there!" The command hit like a gunshot. Conversations halted mid-sentence. A woman gasped, instinctively pulling her child closer. Shoppers froze in place, eyes darting toward the confrontation unfolding in real time. Logan Reese moved forward with purpose, his heavy boots clicking against the tile. His stance was rigid, his hand resting on his belt, fingers twitching near his cuffs. His breath was steady, but his gaze burned with something colder. Something unreadable. Carter stopped, her brow lifting slightly, taking in his aggressive posture. "Excuse me." "ID now?" Reese's voice was sharp, clipped, leaving no room for negotiation. Carter tilted her head, her expression controlled. "And why exactly do you need my ID?" Reese smirked, eyes scanning her from head to toe. "Because you're acting suspicious." A slow inhale. Carter's shoulders squared, but her face remained unreadable. "I walked into a store, purchased a pair of shoes, and left. Which part of that is suspicious?" "I asked the questions." Reese took a step closer, voice lowering. "Hand it over or we'll have a problem." A ripple of unease spread through the crowd. Shoppers nearby hesitated, some edging away, others frozen in place. A few exchanged glances, whispering. The tension in the air was thick, suffocating. A teenager lifted his phone, the screen glowing as he started recording. Reese's patience was thinning. His grip on his cuffs tightened. Carter exhaled, slow and deliberate. "You really don't want to do this." His jaw clenched. "Turn around." She didn't move. A flicker of irritation flashed across his face. He reached for her arm. "Whoa! Whoa! Hold on!" A voice from the crowd broke through the rising tension. A middle-aged man in a blazer stepped forward, palms raised. "She didn't do anything! I was in the store. She paid like everyone else." Reese shot him a glare. "Step back." The man hesitated. "This doesn't look right." Reese's fingers flexed against his cuffs. "I said step back." The man's mouth opened, as if to argue, but his eyes flickered toward Carter. She gave him the smallest shake of her head. An unspoken message. "I've got this." Then, Reese's patience snapped. In one swift motion, he yanked his gun from its holster. The crowd recoiled. A woman screamed. The energy shifted from unease to panic. Shoppers stumbled backward, some shielding their children, others pressing record on their phones. Carter remained still. Her voice was steady, deliberate. "That's a mistake." Reese's grip on the gun tightened. His pulse pounded in his ears. The mall had gone completely silent. The weight of 100 eyes bore down on him. And the cameras were rolling. Logan Reese's finger tensed against the trigger. His stance was locked, his gun aimed directly at Victoria Carter's chest. The weight of the moment bore down on him, but his authority, his control, was absolute. Carter didn't move. She didn't flinch. She simply stared at him, her expression unreadable. Her hands remained raised, her posture calm, but unwavering. The silence stretched between them, thick and suffocating. "Are you sure you want to do this?" Her voice was smooth, steady. There was no panic, no fear, just certainty. Reese scoffed, tilting his head, a smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Why? You think you're special?" His grip on the gun remained firm, but something about her composure unsettled him. She wasn't supposed to act this way. She was supposed to beg, to plead, like they always did. She did neither. Instead, she studied him, her gaze piercing through the bravado, the uniform, the authority he wrapped himself in. Then, the spell broke. "Drop the gun, officer!" The voice rang out from the crowd, sharp and commanding. Reese's head snapped toward the sound, irritation flashing across his face. "Step back! This is police business!" But the crowd wasn't just watching anymore. Murmurs turned into whispers. Whispers turned into outrage. "She didn't do anything," a woman shouted. "This is being recorded," another voice called out. Then, a single sentence shattered everything. "Do you have any idea who you're pointing that gun at?" Reese's grip tightened. The tension in his shoulders hardened. "What the hell are you talking about?" A man at the front of the crowd, holding his phone steady, stepped forward. His voice was clear, deliberate. "You just pulled a gun on a U.S. Army general." A beat of silence. Then the crowd erupted. Gasps rippled through the bystanders. People who had been frozen now surged forward, their voices rising in anger. The camera phones, already recording, zoomed in. The expressions shifted from fear to fury, from silent witnesses to loud opposition. "You're done, man! Put the damn gun down!" "You messed with the wrong person." Reese's face drained of color. A cold weight settled in his chest. The certainty he had clung to, the authority he had wielded, was slipping through his fingers. His gun hand wavered. Victoria Carter hadn't moved an inch. She exhaled slowly, tilting her head just slightly. "Now, do you understand?" The moment stretched impossibly long. The anger of the crowd thickened the air. The weight of 100 cameras bore down on Reese. The knowledge of what he had done, who he had done it to, settled like a stone in his gut. Then, "Drop your weapon, Officer Reese." The voice was sharp, authoritative, one that brooked no argument. Reese turned his head, his pulse hammering. Through the shifting crowd, a figure pushed forward. Angela Brooks, captain of the precinct. Her presence alone cut through the chaos. Her expression was thunderous, her jaw tight, her eyes locked on Reese with nothing but fury. "You just pointed a gun at a decorated Army general," she said, her voice low, controlled, but filled with warning. "I don't think you fully understand what that means." Reese opened his mouth, but no words came out. He had nothing to say, nothing to justify, Nothing to undo what he had done. The crowd was watching. The cameras were rolling. The weight of every mistake he had made now sat squarely on his shoulders. His fingers loosened. His arm wavered. And finally, his gun lowered. The mall was silent. For a moment, no one moved. Then, Angela Brooks stepped forward, her glare unrelenting. "You need to turn around and walk away, Officer Reese. Right now." Reese's throat tightened. His hands shook. His career, his entire life, was crumbling right in front of him. But the consequences had only just begun. Logan Reese sat motionless in his office, staring at the glowing screen in front of him. His inbox was flooded. Messages from department officials, lawyers, even former colleagues. But one email stood out, bolded at the top. Subject: immediate suspension, pending investigation. His chest felt hollow, his fingers cold as they hovered over the mouse. He didn't need to open it. He already knew what it said. The weight of his mistake had settled in the moment his gun had lowered, but now it was suffocating. Hours earlier, the footage had started circulating. A shaky phone camera had captured everything. The way he had confronted Victoria Carter without cause. The way he had escalated the situation. The way he had pulled his weapon on an innocent woman. And the moment of realization, when someone in the crowd had called out her rank, a decorated U.S. Army general. The video spread like wildfire. Social media exploded. News outlets picked it up within the hour. Police officer draws weapon on Black Army general in shocking mall incident. Military leader held at gunpoint by officer in apparent racial profiling case. Caught on camera, Officer Logan Reese under fire for confrontation with Army general. His name was everywhere, and for the first time in his career, it wasn't a symbol of authority. It was a warning. The comments were brutal. "Fire him immediately. This man should never wear a badge again." If she wasn't a general, we all know how this would have ended. Calls for his termination flooded the police department's social media pages. Activists called for criminal charges. Former officers publicly denounced his behavior. His entire reputation, everything he had built, was unraveling in real time. At home, his phone wouldn't stop vibrating. Missed calls, texts, messages from people he hadn't spoken to in years, now demanding answers. His family had stopped answering his calls. His wife had taken their kids to her mother's house until things calmed down. But what was there to say? How could he explain something the entire world had seen? Then came the official response. The police department issued a statement distancing itself from his actions. "We take this matter seriously," it read. "Officer Reese has been placed on immediate suspension pending a full internal review." But behind closed doors, he already knew the truth. The word termination was being whispered at the highest levels. His fellow officers, the ones who had once backed him up without hesitation, avoided eye contact in the halls. Meanwhile, Victoria Carter was everywhere. She hadn't spoken out immediately. But when she did, the world listened. She sat across from a news anchor in a primetime interview, composed, poised, and every bit the leader she had always been. "This isn't about me," she said calmly. "This is about accountability. I was able to walk away from that moment. But how many others don't?" Her words cut deeper than any disciplinary hearing ever could. The backlash against Reese intensified. Civil rights organizations got involved. Public figures demanded action. Protests erupted outside the police department. The mayor released a statement condemning racial profiling. Then came the lawsuit. Victoria Carter's legal team filed a formal complaint against the department, citing violations of civil rights, unlawful detainment, and excessive use of force. The case was gaining traction. Some legal analysts said it could set a new precedent for holding officers accountable. And then came the final blow. A formal review board had been scheduled. Reese would have to stand in front of them, justify his actions, and try to salvage what little was left of his career. Even he knew the chances of that were slim. He clenched his jaw, finally clicking on the email. Effective immediately. You are relieved of duty, pending further investigation. Please report for a disciplinary hearing at... The words blurred. His head fell into his hands. It was over. For the first time in his life, Logan Reese understood what it felt like to have everything taken away in an instant. Justice had been served, but the question remained. What if Victoria Carter had been someone else? Someone without rank, without recognition? Would the outcome have been different? She had walked away that day, but not because of the system. She walked away because of who she was. And that was the problem. In a televised interview, her words carried weight beyond the cameras, beyond the headlines. I was fortunate, she said, but too many others aren't. This isn't about one officer. This is about a culture that allows moments like this to keep happening. The video of the incident had spread across the country, sparking conversations that couldn't be ignored. Public outrage grew. Some demanded criminal charges against Reese. Others called for deeper reform within law enforcement. This wasn't just about one man losing his badge. It was about an entire system being forced to answer for itself. A mistake had cost Logan Reese his career. But for too many others, mistakes like his had cost lives. Justice was served this time, but how many others never got their chance? What do you think should happen next? Join the conversation below. If you believe this story needs to be told, share it. If you don't want to miss more, subscribe now.